it's time to take a look at devotions for today. All right, devotions for today come to us from the book of Psalms, chapter 29. We hear the following. The 29th Psalm is a prophecy of the gospel, that it shall resound with power throughout the world and overthrow the wisdom and the renown of kings and princes and lords and peoples, and that Christ alone will be the only king. He shall be served and glorified with true wisdom and holiness. Therefore he established the flood, baptism, in which the old Adam is now drowned and a new man arises. He gives the name of deserts and forests endeared to the lands of the earth, that they were all under Jew or Gentile, have now been opened and converted to the gospel. Hear the words of Psalm 29. Ascribe to the Lord, O heavenly beings. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord over many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon to skip like a calf, and Syrian like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord flashes forth flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord makes the deer to give birth and strips the forest bare. And in the glory, all peoples cry, glory. Holy cow, I read that wrong. And in his temple, all peoples cry, glory. The Lord sits enthroned over the flood. The Lord sits enthroned as king forever. May the Lord give strength to his people. May the Lord bless his people with peace. Let's pray. Blessed Lord, who caused the Holy Scriptures to be written for our learning, grant us so to hear them, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest them, that we might embrace and ever hold fast to the blessed hope of everlasting life that you have given us through our Savior, Jesus Christ. Who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. It's rough when you start reading things and you get words mixed up. All right. So, here we go. So we finished the intertestamental period, right? You have a basic understanding of life and culture, what was going on in the 400-year gap between the Old and New Testament, which means we're ready to jump into the life of Christ. Before we jump into that, though, I want to just give you an overview of the Gospels, how they're written, what's contained in them, that kind of a thing. Because even though the Gospels all tell us about Jesus' life, there's a lot of nuance between them all, which is why there's 4 of them and not 1, right? So we'll be taking a look at that. The other thing I wanted to mention, though, before we get too far into this, is that today you should be able to see a really quick quiz over the Gospels that I'd like you to do at some point between now and next Friday. It's like 3 multiple choice questions and 1 matching thing, so it'll take you like 5 minutes, if that. But I just want to use it, A, to give you some points, and B, as kind of a baseline of where we are. You can take it like 10 times, and there's no time limit. So, yeah, it's on Unified Classroom. Yep. So you should have no problem getting those knocked out. And I'll remind you kind of throughout the week too. Also, as a public service announcement, remember that next Friday is the end of the quarter, which means that service notes are due, as the case may be. So make sure that you either get those turned in online or in person to me before then, because you don't want to take a 40-point hit at the end of the semester. Yeah.
How many of those do you need?
4. Yep. And you'll notice too, by next Friday, yeah. Yeah, bro. Yeah. Yeah, and you'll notice too that I have it kind of broken out as service note 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you can kind of see where you're at. My hope is to see if I can get those in this weekend here, or maybe even today yet, so that you kind of have an accurate counting of where things sit.
How many questions does gospel, but
Like 4.
Huh?
I think it's like 3 multiple choice question and 1 matching section.
oh.
Yeah.
Easy.
Yep. Oh, actually, I have it. Sorry, it's 5 multiple choice and 1 matching section.
Okay.
But like the questions are, Mary and Joseph fled to Egypt because of. Yeah. It'll be easy. You should have no problem. The matching section might be a little bit rough, but like I said, you can take it multiple times if you want a better score. In the case may be. Cool. All right, questions as we jump into last week of the quarter? Good? All right.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, go for it. All right, so I'm going to give you the first introduction gospel note stuff. We can take a look at that. Andrew.
One last question about vocational hours.
Yep.
Can the ones that you do in say the first quarter, can those carry over
Yep.
into the second quarter?
Yep,
Wait, you
it's
did
20. It's 20 hours a semester.
Oh, I got like 10 invites.
Yeah.
Well, I probably have.
I already have my first semester.
Well, it's not certified. Yeah. You're gonna write, I don't know the dishwasher. That's what I tell. I don't know the dishwasher. Wait, just tell me.
What's up?
And then I got you this sheet.
This is notes, gospels.
No, you just handed this one out.
Oh. That's probably notes from last time.
Huh? I what? Not on Sunday. Why? I'm busy all Saturday because I'm shooting for Friday morning and I have family photos and have visual birthday. Oh. And tonight I'm.
Oh, okie dokie. So, let's take a look here. What's up?
Random question. Is this like chapel count? Or is like you're taking notes during
Generally, no. My encouragement is going to be to look at a full church service.
okay, because it was telling me like, oh, I gotta do this week, and like, if you do chapel count, I don't know.
Yeah, I really want to encourage taking a look at a church service just because sometimes chapels are a little more freeform and most religious services are regimented. Okay. All right, gang, let's take a look at this. So,
Gang?
yeah, something like that, yeah. Solving the mysteries of not the Gospels in John. Okay, so before we jump into this, I want you to think about your favorite story, your favorite book. Hopefully,
Like of the Bible?
no, just in general. I mean, I guess it could be the Bible, but just in
I don't
general.
really read books, so probably the Bible.
Like if you had the answer to answer this question as an icebreaker of what is your favorite book?
Oh, I would just say, I don't like read books. Last week I read in seventh grade. Haha.
What's the name of the train that goes? Yeah.
A Little Engine That Could?
Yeah. That's my favorite book.
Now, I understand, right? I understand that some of you probably struggle with that because you haven't read a book since 7th grade, which is unfortunate. But I suppose we'll kind of make do with it. But the thing I want you to think about is, though, first off, why is whatever book you're thinking of, if you thought of a book, why is it your favorite, right? But related to that, I want you to think about this, and this is maybe where, you know, the movie fanatics can kind of come back in, right? What's necessary for a story to be
A plot.
a good story?
Oh, things that happen. Action.
Action?
A climax.
An antagonist.
It depends on your personality and antagonist. Okay? Engaging.
Something I might
Something
like.
happens that you don't expect.
Something happens you don't expect. Plot twist.
That's a good plot. I mean, for me, it's, yeah, the plot. I mean,
Something
they're
that
not gonna
grabs your
say
attention.
superior
Something that
to
grabs your
another.
attention.
Like, it's really an opinion. I mean, it's not really objectively superior to another one. That's a nice objective opinion. I have a plot.
Okay.
Wait, what are the answers?
Yeah, the plot has to be something of interest.
I was also mentioning objective, and I'm not saying, well, this book is superior to the other. It's more objective opinion.
Yeah. So it depends on on your personal taste, right? What it is that you what it is that you wanna read and look at.
You win.
Okay.
Good game.
I'm listening to you, Mr.
Yeah, I know. But here becomes the thing. Right, here becomes the thing. There's always something with a good story that takes you back. And for example, growing up, my two favorite books were The Little Engine That Could. Why? Because it had a train in it.
Wow.
Thomas.
I dressed up as Thomas for 3 years in a row.
There you go. Thomas the Tank Engine. That's,
No one,
oh
it
yeah.
was just me
Dude,
and Thomas.
me and Mr. Heinlein were real good friends. I was sad to see him go, but it happens. The other really, I guess technically it's a collection of stories that were my favorite growing up, were The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh.
Oh, my dad used to read that.
Those
too.
are so good. I dressed up as Winnie the Pooh too.
Who's winning the?
No, just.
Winnie the Pooh is a stuffed bear that goes.
bear and then the donkey.
You guys know Winnie the Pooh?
Oh, I know Donkey with Depression. I know that.
Eeyore, yeah.
I dressed up as him one year.
There you go.
That's my boy.
Wait, so, Tigger, is he like a, Tigger's a tiger, right?
He's a
Yeah,
tiger.
Yeah.
He's a tiger.
He's a tiger.
He's got like ADHD.
One
Yeah.
of my favorite books, Harry Potter.
Ah, there you go.
39.
Now,
If there's good storyline and good character development.
Storyline character. Oh.
and that becomes the thing, right? And I think universally we will always come back to this idea, right? That what makes a good story is it has a good storyline. Now, this doesn't, guys, this doesn't just apply to books, right? I mean, like we said, it hits the movies, but it also hits on the stories that we tell each other, right? Because for the most part, you don't tell your family and friends about how wonderful it was for you to wake up in the morning, right?
I mean, I would post that on my trust story.
I mean, unless of course there was something out of the ordinary or something that made it a good story, right? Because there was a plot twist or an antagonist, or you struggle to pick out clothes in the morning. I don't know, right? But the thing is that we don't normally tell each other about the mundane. But here becomes I think something that becomes really important. As we look at this idea of what makes a good story, I told you that my favorite story collection of stories growing up was Winnie the Pooh, and the thing is that every time that we had storybook time, that's what we went back to. As a child, right, I just wanted to hear the same stories over and over again. Now, the thing is that I've both heard and watched enough Winnie the Pooh that I could probably recite most of the stories to you, or give you a general.
Can we have a story time?
This is like a couple lines.
I remember my dad used to read it to me, I don't remember any of it.
We're gonna have a story time with the gospel.
Story
Absolutely.
If I ever have children, that's gonna be one of their.
The thing that I want you though, the thing I want you though to think about or consider is, what's the difference between your favorite story and the Gospels?
What's true and what's not.
Okay, one's true, one's not, maybe.
Your father is not written.
Then we go to the question, what is true?
Ooh, there we go. To maybe to rephrase the comment, right? One is fiction, one is nonfiction, right? One actually happened in the historical context and one didn't. Okay.
What is nonfiction?
That's, I mean, that doesn't necessarily negate it, right?
No, I meant like, what is truth? I was just replacing truth with the synonym of truth to make it what is nonfiction, it's a little, whatever you want to
Well,
call it.
like if you read an autobiography on Rosa Parks, obviously that's
You can't-
real life.
Excuse me, an autobiography and no.
That's the point, you take the Ouija board out.
Guys, here becomes the thing though, I really would ask you to think about or consider though, because the thing is that I watch this happen every year. I'm watching the same scenario unfold before me, right? We get to a point where we treat stories like all stories like they're stories. Especially stories that you've heard over and over and over again. Right?
Like you don't think of it like it's actually real things that happen, you just think of it like you already.
Right. Think about it. You all have a favorite. You all have a favorite book, right? A collection of books. And when you first read it, I'm fairly confident that I can say that you probably reached out to your friends and family and were like, wow, that was a good book, right? I didn't expect insert whatever plot line, right, to happen. Right? Much the same way as I was excited every night to hear the next accounting of Winnie the Pooh, even though I had heard it over and over again. But there's a difference, I think, between how children approach stories, right, and how adults do. Right? Because I would venture to guess that most of you are probably pretty familiar with the life of Christ in some form or context, but it's gotten to the point where it's not new or exciting. And I don't really know if I can necessarily change that for you in this class. But what I would charge you to think about is why is that? And because the life of Christ has been called, right, the greatest story ever told. Better than Mr. Zoyner's blue pencil account, right? Better than the litany, right? The litany of stories that he can tell, right? There's something different that's contained in the Gospels, and it's something that I'm excited to explore with you. But something to think about. I really hope you do take some time. What are the Gospels to you? And what does it mean for your life? So we have to take a look though.
You should watch.
Yeah.
Have you seen my boy, Wes Waldo?
I have a couple of places. Not recently. I have not seen Waldo recently.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Alright.
Mr. Schmidt.
Yeah.
I was talking to some, Pacific Cop people, and that they said there's a submarine in Manitowoc.
Mm-hmm. The USS Coda. The diesel engines are connected, so it would be difficult to hijack it. Also, I think the vent valves are sealed, so you wouldn't be able to actually submerge. It takes some doing, but I suppose you could get it operational. Although I have a feeling the Maritime Museum would not appreciate having their centerpiece discounted with.
Yeah, but we'll go on our adventures.
It's up in Manitowoc.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So let's talk about the Gospels, right? Because the Gospels really are the climax, if you will, of the Bible. It's the point at which all of the Old Testament comes to a head, right? The Gospels are the points at which the falling action starts to happen. Now, you don't necessarily have to scribble down all of this, but the thing I want you to understand is when we talk about the Gospels, there really are two definitions. There's the narrow definition and the wide definition, right? The narrow definition, when we talk about the gospel of Jesus Christ, the narrow definition is we're talking about the life of Christ, right? That's really what I want you to take away from the narrow definition. We'll talk more about the life of Christ and all of that, but when we talk about the narrow definition, we're talking about the good news, the life, the death, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. When we talk about the wide definition of the gospel, right? That's what happens when I say, what are the Gospels, right? Which are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Good, right? They're the biographical accounts of Christ. So you have kind of two different viewpoints of this word gospel, which means good news, right? Good news, which is Jesus' life for us. Now, the thing is that how we get to this, right, changes from gospel to gospel. And we're going to explore that in a little more detail, right? Each writer has their own little style. Each writer has their own belief, right, of how they're going to do this. But the thing that I need you to understand is that while the Gospels have different stylization, if you will, in how things are, they all agree with each other, right? They don't contain the same stories, but they all intersect with each other. Everything matches up.
Wait, they don't have the same stories, but what?
By that I mean, right? The only miracle you find in all four of the Gospels is the feeding of the 5,000, right?
Yeah, but that was when
Wait,
they were all
yeah,
together.
okay, so the Gospels are the recounting, or like, okay, they are restating Jesus' life and death.
Yep.
And then after the death and resurrection of him.
Yep.
Okay, so it's four different stories of the same thing.
Not different stories, but different viewpoints of accounting. I think that's the way to look at it. So
So there were disciples
Yeah.
that went with Jesus,
Yep.
right?
right.
So they all witnessed the same things. Why or how are they?
Let me ask you this question. Let's see. We just we had a volleyball game right this past week, right? And if you asked, let's just say the different members of the volleyball team to tell you what happened at this last week's volleyball game, are you going to get the exact same story from everybody?
No, but they'll be very similar in a lot of ways and it has to be that you said there's only one miracle that's consistent throughout four and none of the others.
Correct.
So how are all the other miracles that Jesus did credible if you can only verify what
Isn't there like?
That's fine.
You don't understand.
No, but it becomes a good charge, right? So here's I think the good and proper way to look at it, right? Matthew and Luke are the only two gospels that have a recounting of Christ's birth and some of his early years. Mark starts off with his ministry, and John, we're just going to kind of set John over to the side because he does his own thing. He does his own thing. It matches up, but we have to treat him as kind of a special case because it's not chronological. But when we look at the chronology of the events, even though the feeding of the 5,000 is the only miracle that's in all four of them, the others match up at different points. So we can actually put the entirety of Christ's life on a time scale. Let me switch this real quick. This might be of use to you. There we go. Because I was looking at this morning. Where is it?
Can you do that? You probably people did. As long as you have your mouth. Yes. Such a weird word. Is that what you're feeling? Is that what you're feeling? Yeah. No. You're also.
There we go. All right, so take a look at this. So this is, and I'm going to give this to you guys later on in this semester, but just as a point of reference, and I know we're starting to run out of time here, but if you take a look at, let's just say the Passion Week, right? So the last week of Christ's life, Christ's triumphal entry into Jerusalem, so what we would call Palm Sunday, it happens in Matthew 21, Mark 11, Luke 19, and John 12, right? It's not a miracle, so that's why I say the feeding of the 5,000 is the only miracle, but these accounts do show up in different places. But, right, if you take a look, let's scroll down here a little bit, right? So I told you about the fig tree being withered, right? And how it was important that if a fig tree had leaves, it also had figs. Why is that? Because when you take a look here in Matthew 21 and Mark 11, you see that same account match up. Now, that's not to say that there are different things in different books. For example, Christ's parable of the two wicked sons only appears in Matthew chapter 21, right? So as we take a look at these things, right, these are the recollections that happened in the minds of Matthew, in the research that both Mark and Luke did, and the recollections of John, as the case may be. So it doesn't necessarily invalidate them, because the thing is that if all four of these gospels had the exact same stories, you could make the same charge that, well, they just collaborated on them. I mean, you can tell because their homework looks exactly the same as their neighbor's homework. It's like a typical day at Lutheran High, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Maybe they're just like, it's okay, guys, I already wrote it, you guys don't need to.
Right? So that becomes the thing. The accountings where they do intersect each other don't contradict each other. But the chronology of how Christ went and did is not if you will, an hour by hour, play by play in terms of what's going on. In much the same way as like I gave you as a term of analogy, the volleyball game from this past week, you're not going to get the exact same recounting of every hit, serve, spike that happened by both teams. Does that make some sense?
Wait, why we not 12 against them?
No, yeah, well, and that becomes a thing, right? And like I've told you guys before, right? I'm gonna make your head hurt. As the case may be, we get done at 11:12. We got like 4 minutes.
We get done at 12?
Yeah.
Oh,
All right. So here becomes the thing with that. This here, right? So as we take a look at the Bible in terms of its style and agreement, right? The accounts don't contradict each other. It's not like it's not like we find in Matthew that Jesus was crucified between 2 criminals, and in John he was crucified between 7. None of those details are invalid. There's a couple of little nuances in terms of like the hour by hour play by play. For example, where is it? In Matthew and Mark, the number of times the rooster crows before Peter comes to an understanding that he's offended Christ is different. It's 1 versus 2. The rooster crowing the first time versus the second time. I would charge it's not a contradiction, but maybe a limitation in the remembrances that Simon Peter would have had about when things were going on. And I think you could also trace it back to a translation error potentially, not error, but difference. Well, the thing is while the accounting is perfect, it was also written by men too, right? So it's not as if God is giving us the hour by hour play by play with it, right? It's the remembrances of what Christ did by them. Yeah.
Okay, but like for you as a teacher, using this and struggling to read that, you would, I don't think you would ever like read with another contradiction because that's not the right contradiction. Yeah, contradiction. Like you would never agree that it was struggling to read.
So here becomes a thing, right? It's not, I would argue it's not necessarily a contradiction, but more detail that's left out. For example, right, I could say things this way, right? I can say the bell rang, right? Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that there was a bell that rang. How many times did it ring? That becomes the interesting question, right? Because I haven't given you that detail. For example, the bell's about to ring here in 30 seconds, right? Is that the dismissal bell or the next bell for class? Now, because you guys are in this situation, you know that there are 2 bells that are coming for you, right? One bell to dismiss you from this class and another to mark you as tardy for the next one if you're not in class, right? And that becomes, I think, the point of the rooster, right? So when we take a look at the text, it's going to say the rooster crowed. Well, how many times does it crow? Well, I mean, if you've ever been around a rooster, you know those things are just like a giant alarm clock that you can't shut off, right? And I think that becomes maybe the way to think about it. We'll definitely talk about it more because it becomes important for the passion account. But we can jump into this on Monday too. Sounds good. All right, have a good weekend, guys.